What would you do if helping a lost child forced you to confront the darkest secret of your past and choose between the safety of solitude and the courage to love again? Tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. My name is Ezekiel Thornton, though most folks who knew me 20 years ago are either dead or wish they were. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent the last 2 decades of my life alone in these Colorado mountains, digging for gold that seems to get scarcer every year and trying to forget things that a man ought to be able to forget. The cabin I call home sits about 15 miles northeast of Silver Creek, nestled in a canyon that most people couldn't find, even if they had a map and a guide. That's exactly how I like it. The walls are rough-hewn timber chinked with mud and moss. The roof is cedar shingles that leak when it rains hard, and the whole place smells like wood smoke, bacon grease, and the loneliness that seeps into a man's bones when he's been by himself too long. I built this place with my own 2 hands back in 1859, when I still believed that a man could outrun his past if he just got far enough away from civilization. 20 years later, I've learned that some things follow you no matter how far you run, but by then I was too old and too set in my ways to change course. The mine shaft I've been working is about 100 yards from the cabin, carved into the granite face of the canyon wall. It's not much to look at, just a hole in the rock that goes back maybe 30 feet, but it's produced enough gold over the years to keep me in supplies and ammunition. Not enough to make me rich, mind you, but enough to keep me alive and away from people. That's all I wanted anymore, to be left alone. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when my solitary existence got turned upside down. I was working the shaft, swinging my pickaxe at a particularly stubborn vein of quartz that showed promising flecks of gold, when I heard something that made me freeze in place, crying. Not the kind of crying a grown man does when he's hurt or frustrated, but the high-pitched, desperate sobbing of a child. I set down my pickaxe and listened hard, thinking maybe I was hearing things. Living alone for 20 years can play tricks on a man's mind, and I'd heard phantom sounds before, but there it was again, definitely crying, and definitely coming from somewhere outside the mine. I grabbed my rifle and stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, squinting against the glare. The crying was coming from down the canyon, near the creek that ran along the canyon floor. I followed the sound, my boots crunching on the gravel and fallen leaves. What I found there made me stop dead in my tracks. It was a boy, couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old, sitting on a fallen log beside the creek. He was small for his age, with dark hair that hung in his eyes and clothes that were torn and dirty. His face was streaked with tears and mud, and he was shivering despite the warm afternoon sun. "Hey there," I called out, not wanting to startle him. "You lost, son." The boy looked up at me with the biggest, most frightened eyes I'd ever seen. They were green, like spring leaves, and they reminded me of something I didn't want to think about. "Please, mister," he said, his voice hoarse from crying. "I don't know where I am. I've been walking for days, and I can't find my way back to town." I stood there looking at him, torn between my natural instinct to help and my equally natural instinct to avoid any kind of human contact. The boy was clearly in trouble, but getting involved meant complications, and complications were exactly what I'd been avoiding for 20 years. "What's your name?" I asked, stepping closer. "Tommy," he said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Tommy Mitchell. I was traveling with my uncle, but we got separated." "Where were you headed?" "Denver, I think. Maybe Colorado Springs. I ain't sure." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. In my experience, people usually had reasons for ending up in places they couldn't explain, and those reasons weren't always good ones. But this boy looked genuinely scared and lost. "How long since you ate?" I asked. 3 days, maybe 4. I'd been drinking water from the creek, but I couldn't find nothing to eat. That decided it. I might be a selfish old hermit, but I wasn't going to let a child starve to death in my canyon. "Come on," I said, jerking my head toward the cabin. "I got some food up at my place. You can rest up, and tomorrow I'll take you down to Silver Creek. Marshal Crawford can help you find your uncle." The boy's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, mister. I don't know what I would have done." "Name's Ezekiel," I said, "but you can call me Zeke." "Thank you, Mr. Zeke." I led him back to the cabin, noticing how he favored his left leg when he walked. When we got inside, I lit the oil lamp and got a good look at him. He was thinner than I'd realized, with dark circles under his eyes and scratches on his arms that looked like they'd come from thorns or sharp rocks. "Sit down at the table," I said, pointing to the rough wooden table in the center of the room. "I'll rustle up some food." And I put a pot of beans on the stove and sliced some bread I'd baked a few days earlier. While the beans heated up, I studied the boy out of the corner of my eye. There was something about him that bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. "So," I said, "tell me about this uncle of yours." The boy's face darkened. He's not very nice. He said he was taking me to live with some relatives in Denver, but I don't think that's true." "What do you think is true?" "I think he was going to sell me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard of such things, children being sold to work in mines or factories or worse, but I'd never encountered it firsthand. "Sell you to who?" "I don't know. He talked about it with some men back in Kansas City. They said they knew people who would pay good money for a kid like me." I felt anger rising in my chest, the kind of anger I hadn't felt in 20 years. "And you ran away?" "Yeah, 3 nights ago, when he was sleeping off a drunk. I took some food and started walking west, but I got lost in the mountains." I ladled the beans into a bowl and set it in front of him along with the bread and a glass of water. The boy fell on the food like he was starving, which he probably was. "Easy," I said. "Don't eat too fast or you'll make yourself sick." He slowed down slightly, but I could see he was having trouble controlling himself. I'd been hungry before, but never like this. Looking at him eat reminded me of things I'd tried to forget. "Tommy," I said, sitting down across from him, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Are you running from the law?" "No, sir. I ain't done nothing wrong." "Then why are you so scared?" He stopped eating and looked at me with those green eyes. "Because if my uncle finds me, he'll kill me. He said he would if I ever tried to run away." "And you believe him?" "Yes, sir. I seen him kill before." The matter-of-fact way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't some pampered city kid playing at adventure. This was a child who had seen real violence, real evil. "Well," I said, "he's not going to find you here. This canyon is harder to find than a needle in a haystack, and I've got enough ammunition to hold off an army." "You'd do that? For me?" "I'd do that for any kid in your situation." It was a lie, and we both knew it. I wouldn't have done it for just any kid. But there was something about Tommy that got under my skin, something that made me want to protect him, even though I'd sworn off protecting anyone but myself. Can I stay here tonight?" he asked. "You can stay as long as you need to, but tomorrow we're going to have to figure out what to do with you." "What do you mean?" "I mean you can't just disappear, Tommy. People will be looking for you. If your uncle reported you missing, there might be a reward out, and if Marshal Crawford finds out I've been hiding you, he'll want to know why." The boy's face went pale. "You won't turn me in, will you?" "Not to your uncle. But I can't keep you here forever either. I'm not equipped to raise a child." "I don't need raising. I can take care of myself." "No, you can't. If you could take care of yourself, you wouldn't be sitting in my kitchen eating my beans." He looked down at his bowl, and I immediately regretted my harsh words. The kid was scared and alone, and I was being an ass. "Look," I said, "we'll figure something out. Maybe there are other relatives, decent ones. Maybe the marshal can help us find a good family to take you in." "I don't want to go to another family. I want to stay with you." "Why?" "Because you're the first person in a long time who's been nice to me, and because I think you're lonely too." His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I was lonely, lonelier than I'd ever been in my life. But loneliness was safer than the alternative. "I'm not lonely," I said. "I like being alone." Then how come you got 3 place settings in your cupboard?" I looked over at the cabinet where I kept my dishes. He was right. I did have 3 place settings, though I hadn't used more than one in years. They were a reminder of a life I'd once planned to live, a life that had been torn away from me. "That's none of your business," I said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. Finish your food and get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." I made up a bed for him on the floor near the fireplace, using blankets I hadn't touched in years. As I watched him settle in, I noticed again how small he was, how young he looked in the flickering firelight. "Mr. Zeke," he said softly. "Yeah, thank you for helping me. I know you didn't have to. Go to sleep, Tommy." But I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the boy breathe and thinking about things I'd tried to forget, about a life I'd once had, about people I'd once loved, about mistakes I'd made that could never be undone. The boy reminded me of someone, though I couldn't put my finger on who. Something about his eyes, his voice, the way he moved. It was like looking at a ghost from my past. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that 20 years of solitude had made me see connections that weren't there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something about Tommy Mitchell that was going to change everything, and I was afraid to find out what it was. As dawn broke over the mountains, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat watching the boy sleep. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. But I'd learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the most innocent-looking people carried the darkest secrets. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours I'd discover that Tommy Mitchell was carrying the biggest secret of all, one that would force me to confront the worst mistake of my life and choose between the safety of my solitude and the terrifying possibility of redemption. Chapter 2. I woke up to the sound of someone moving around in my kitchen. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. It had been so long since I'd heard another person in my cabin that the sound seemed impossible. Then I remembered. The boy. Tommy was standing at the stove, using a wooden spoon to stir something in a pot. He'd found my coffee and was brewing a fresh pot, and something that smelled like flapjacks was sizzling in my cast-iron skillet. "What are you doing?" I asked, sitting up in my chair. I'd fallen asleep watching him, and my back was stiff as a board. "Making breakfast," he said without turning around. "Figured it was the least I could do after you helped me." I watched him work, noticing how comfortable he seemed in the kitchen. Most boys his age could barely boil water, but Tommy moved around like he'd been cooking for years. "Where'd you learn to cook?" "Had to learn. My uncle wasn't much for taking care of me." I stood up and walked over to the stove, looking over his shoulder at the flapjacks. They were golden brown and perfectly round, better than anything I'd made in months. "You're pretty good at this." "I'm good at a lot of things people don't expect." There was something in his voice that made me look at him more carefully. In the morning light, I could see details I'd missed the night before. His skin was smooth, almost delicate, and his hands were smaller than I'd noticed. His hair was longer than most boys wore theirs, and the way he moved. "Tommy," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." He tensed up but didn't turn around. "What? Are you really a boy?" The spoon clattered to the floor. Tommy spun around, his face pale as milk, and I saw the truth in his eyes before he said a word. I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do, and lying to me isn't going to help either of us." For a moment we just stared at each other. Then Tommy's shoulders sagged, and he looked down at his feet. "How did you know?" "I've been around long enough to notice things. The way you move, the way you talk, the way you cook. You're not Tommy Mitchell, are you?" "My name is Thomasina," she said quietly. "Thomasina Sarah Mitchell, but everyone calls me Tommy." "And you're not a boy?" "No, sir. I'm 14 years old and I'm a girl." The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been harboring a runaway girl, which was bad enough, but if her uncle was looking for her, if there was a reward, if Marshall Crawford found out, why didn't you tell me? "Because I was scared. Men don't usually help girls like me, but they might help a boy." "What do you mean, girls like you?" She looked up at me with those green eyes, and I saw a pain there that no 14-year-old should have to carry. Girls whose uncles tried to sell them to brothels. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected something like this, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that turned my stomach. That's what he was planning? Yes, sir. He told me all about it. Said I was getting too old to be useful around the house, but I was still young enough to be worth something to the right people. I felt that familiar rage rising in my chest, the same rage that had destroyed my life 20 years ago. And you ran away. 3 nights ago. I waited until he passed out drunk, then I took some food and whatever money I could find and started walking. I figured if I could get far enough away, maybe I could find work somewhere, start over. Dressed as a boy. It's safer that way. Men leave boys alone mostly. I sat down heavily at the table, trying to process what she'd told me. This changed everything. A missing boy was one thing, but a missing girl, especially one being hunted by the kind of men who trafficked in children, was something else entirely. Tommy, I said, I need you to tell me everything about your uncle, about where you came from, about who might be looking for you. She turned off the stove and sat down across from me. My parents died when I was 10. Cholera. My uncle Jacob was the only family I had left, so I went to live with him in Kansas City. What's his full name? Jacob Mitchell, but everyone calls him Black Jack. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Black Jack Mitchell. I'd heard that name before, years ago, in connection with some very bad people. Tommy, I said carefully, is your uncle a big man? Maybe 6 feet tall, dark hair, scar on his left cheek? You know him. I know of him. He's got a reputation that goes back 20 years. Gambling, gun running, human trafficking. He's not just mean, Tommy, he's dangerous. I know. That's why I ran. If he's looking for you, he's not going to give up easy. Men like Blackjack don't like to lose their investments. What do you mean? I mean, he's probably got people out looking for you right now. And if they find you... I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. She knew what would happen if they found her. So, what do? I don't know. But keeping you here isn't going to work long term. This canyon might be hard to find, but it's not impossible. And if Black Jack has put word out that he's looking for you, eventually someone's going to think to check all the remote places. Are you going to turn me in? To the marshal? No, but I can't keep you here forever either. I'm not equipped to take care of a girl your age. I told you, I can take care of myself. No, you can't. And the fact that you think you can just proves how young you are. She looked hurt, but I pressed on. Tommy, you're 14 years old. You need schooling, proper clothes, a safe place to grow up. I can't give you any of those things, but you could try. Why would I want to try? The question came out harsher than I'd intended, and I saw her flinch. But she recovered quickly and looked me straight in the eye. Because you're lonely, and you're running from something just like I am. And because maybe we could help each other. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? You've been living alone in these mountains for 20 years, and you've got 3 place settings in your cupboard. You've got a rocking chair by the fireplace that's too small for you, and there's a woman's dress hanging in the back of your closet. I felt the blood drain from my face. You went through my things. I was looking for something to wear while I washed my clothes. I didn't mean to pry. That dress doesn't belong to you. I know. It belonged to someone important to you. Someone you lost. Stop talking. Someone you loved. Maybe a wife, maybe a daughter. I said stop. But she didn't stop. You're running from something that happened to them, aren't you? Something bad. Something that made you come up here and hide from the world. I stood up so fast that my chair fell over. You don't know anything about me or my life. I know you're hurting. I know you blame yourself for whatever happened, and I know you're scared to care about anyone else because you think you'll just lose them too. Her words hit so close to home that I felt like I couldn't breathe. You need to leave. Right now. I can't leave. I told you my uncle will find me. That's not my problem. Yes, it is. You made it your problem when you brought me here and fed me and gave me a place to sleep. You can't just throw me out now. Watch me. I grabbed her arm, intending to drag her to the door, but she pulled back and her shirt tore. What I saw underneath made me freeze in place. Her torso was covered in bruises, some old and yellow, others fresh and purple. There were welts across her back that looked like they'd come from a belt, and what looked like burn marks on her shoulder. "Jesus," I whispered. She quickly pulled the torn shirt closed, but it was too late. I'd seen enough. "He did this to you? It's not as bad as it looks." "The hell it's not. How long has this been going on?" "Since I went to live with him. It got worse when I started. When I started changing, when I started looking more like a woman, I felt sick. This child had been brutalized by the one person who was supposed to protect her, and I'd been ready to throw her out into the wilderness to face him again." "Tommy," I said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. It's not your fault. Sit down. Let me look at those wounds. I'm fine." "No, you're not. Some of those cuts look infected." I got my medical kit from the shelf and began cleaning the worst of the wounds on her back. She winced, but didn't cry out, which told me she was used to pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked as I worked. "Because I was afraid you'd send me back to him, or that you'd think I deserved it." "No child deserves this." "My uncle said I did. He said I was wicked, that I needed to be taught lessons." "Your uncle is a monster." As I bandaged her wounds, I found myself thinking about the woman's dress in my closet, about the rocking chair by the fireplace, about the 3-place settings I'd never been able to put away. 20 years ago, I'd had a wife and a daughter. Sarah had been 14, just like Tommy. She'd had the same green eyes, the same way of moving, the same stubborn streak that got her into trouble, and I'd failed to protect her. I'd been a sheriff then, in a small town in Kansas. I'd made enemies, the kind of enemies who don't fight fair. They'd come for me through my family, and by the time I'd realized what was happening, it was too late. I'd found them in our burning house, my wife and daughter, and I'd been too late to save them. The guilt had eaten me alive, driven me to drink, destroyed my career, and finally sent me running to these mountains where I thought I could hide from the pain. But looking at Tommy now, seeing her wounds, hearing her story, I realized that maybe I'd been given a second chance. Maybe I couldn't save Sarah, but I could save Tommy. "Listen to me," I said, finishing with the bandages. "I'm going to help you, but we need to be smart about this." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we need to figure out how to keep you safe without getting both of us killed in the process." "You really think my uncle will come looking for me?" "I think Blackjack Mitchell will turn over every rock in Colorado if he has to, and when he does, we need to be ready." That night I sat up again, watching her sleep and planning. I'd sworn off violence 20 years ago, but some things were worth fighting for. And this scared, brave girl who trusted me with her secret was definitely worth fighting for. I just hoped I was still man enough to do what needed to be done when the time came. Mataush. 3 days passed in relative peace. Tommy helped me with the cooking and cleaning, and I taught her how to pan for gold in the creek. She was a quick learner, and watching her work reminded me painfully of my daughter Sarah, who'd had the same eager curiosity about everything. But our peaceful existence came to an abrupt end on Thursday morning when I heard the sound of horses approaching the canyon. I grabbed my rifle and motioned for Tommy to hide behind the cabin. Through the window, I could see 4 men on horseback picking their way carefully down the canyon trail. They were all armed, and they had the look of men who were used to violence. The man in the lead was big and dark-haired, with a scar on his left cheek that confirmed my worst fears. Blackjack Mitchell had found us. "Thornton," he called out when they reached the cabin. "I know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized men." I stepped out onto the porch, my rifle held casually but ready. "This is private property, Mitchell. You're not welcome here. I'm looking for something that belongs to me. A boy about 13 years old. Dark hair, green eyes, goes by the name Tommy. Haven't seen any boy like that. That's funny, because I have it on good authority that you're harboring my nephew." "Your authority is wrong," Blackjack smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You know, Thornton, I've heard stories about you. Used to be a sheriff down in Kansas until your family got themselves killed. Heard you've been hiding up here ever since, playing hermit. What's your point? My point is that you got a soft spot for lost children, and I'm betting that soft spot is going to get you killed if you don't give me what I want. And what exactly do you want? I want my nephew. The boy owes me money, and I intend to collect. Even if I had seen this boy, which I haven't, what makes you think I'd turn him over to a piece of garbage like you? Blackjack's smile disappeared. Because if you don't, I'm going to burn this place down with you in it. I raised my rifle slightly. You're welcome to try. 4 against 1, old man. I like those odds. So do I. We stared at each other for a long moment. I knew he was right about the odds, but I also knew that men like Blackjack were usually cowards at heart. They preferred to fight when they had overwhelming advantages. Tell you what, he said finally. I'll give you 1 hour to think about it. If the boy isn't standing right here when I get back, things are going to get unpleasant for you. And if he is, then you get to keep breathing. They rode off, but I knew they wouldn't go far. They'd post men at the mouth of the canyon to make sure we couldn't escape, then come back with reinforcements. I found Tommy hiding behind the cabin, her face white with terror. Was that him? I asked. That was him? How did he find us? Probably put word out that he was looking for you. Someone must have remembered seeing you in one of the towns. What are we going to do? We're going to run. Where? You said yourself this canyon is hard to find. If we leave here, we'll be sitting ducks. Not if we're smart about it. I know these mountains better than anyone, and there are places we can go where even Blackjack won't be able to follow. What about your mine? Your cabin? Everything you've built here? I looked around at the home I'd built, the life I'd created, the solitude I'd treasured for 20 years. None of that matters as much as keeping you safe. Why? Why are you doing this for me? I looked at her standing there in the afternoon sunlight, brave and scared and trusting, and I knew I had to tell her the truth. Because 20 years ago I had a daughter. Her name was Sarah, and she was exactly your age. She had your eyes, your spirit, your stubborn streak. And I failed to protect her. What happened? I was a sheriff in a town called Millerville. I'd been going after a gang of outlaws, and they decided to hit me where it would hurt the most. They came to my house while I was at work, and I stopped, unable to finish. They killed your family. They killed my family. My wife, my daughter, everything that mattered to me. I hunted them down afterward, killed every one of them, but it didn't bring Sarah back. It didn't bring my wife back. It just made me into the kind of man who could kill in cold blood. Is that why you came here? To hide from that man? I came here to die. I figured if I got far enough away from civilization, eventually the mountains would kill me and I wouldn't have to live with the guilt anymore. But you didn't die. No, I just got older and lonelier and more bitter. Until 3 days ago, when you showed up and reminded me what it felt like to care about someone again. Mr. Zeke, I can't save Sarah, Tommy, but I can save you. And maybe if I do, maybe I can find some kind of peace. What if we both get killed? Then we'll die fighting instead of running, and that's better than the alternative. I spent the next hour gathering supplies and weapons. I had enough ammunition to fight a small war, and I knew every trail and hiding place in these mountains. If we were smart and careful, we might be able to stay ahead of Blackjack long enough to get to Silver Creek, where Marshal Crawford could help us. We loaded everything into my pack mule and prepared to leave. But as we were about to set out, I heard something that made my blood run cold. More horses, a lot more horses. I looked down the canyon trail and saw at least a dozen riders approaching. Blackjack had kept his word. He'd brought reinforcements. We're too late, I said. They've blocked the trail. Is there another way out? There's a game trail that leads up the canyon wall, but it's steep and narrow, 1 horse at a time, and if they catch us on it, we'll be trapped. Yeah. Tommy looked at me with those green eyes, and I saw something there that reminded me so much of Sarah that it took my breath away. Mr. Zeke, she said, I want you to know that these last few days have been the best of my life. You treated me like I mattered, like I was worth something. Nobody ever did that before. You do matter, Tommy. You matter more than you know. If we don't make it out of this, we will. But if we don't, I want you to know that you're not a failure. You saved me in every way that counts. I looked at this brave girl who'd trusted me with her life, and I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. Tommy, I said, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I want you to take the mule and head up that game trail. Don't look back, don't wait for me. Just keep going until you reach the top of the canyon. What about you? I'm going to buy you some time. No, we stick together. This isn't a democracy, girl. I'm telling you to run, and you're going to run. I won't leave you. Yes, you will. Because that's what daughters do when their fathers tell them to run. The word hung in the air between us, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. You really think of me as your daughter. I think of you as the second chance I never thought I'd get, and I'm not going to waste it. I love you, Mr. Zeke. I love you too, Tommy. Now go. She kissed my cheek and headed for the game trail, leading the mule. I watched her go, then turned back to face the men who were riding toward my cabin. Blackjack was in the lead, and he was smiling. Time's up, Thornton. Where's the boy? There is no boy, I said, stepping out to meet them. There's only a scared girl who's been brutalized by a monster, and she's under my protection now. Your protection doesn't mean much, old man. We'll see about that. The battle that followed was short and brutal. I managed to take down 3 of them before they overwhelmed me, but it was enough. It gave Tommy the time she needed to reach the top of the canyon and disappear into the wilderness. As I lay dying in the dirt outside my cabin, I thought about Sarah and the life we'd never gotten to live together, but I also thought about Tommy and the life she'd now have a chance to live because of the choice I'd made. Marshal Crawford found me 2 days later, along with the bodies of Blackjack Mitchell and his men. He also found Tommy, who'd made it to Silver Creek, and told him the whole story. At my funeral, she stood beside my grave and cried for the father she'd found and lost in the space of a few days. But she also smiled, because she knew that I'd died the way I'd chosen to live those last few days, protecting someone I loved. Tommy went to live with Martha Kellerman, who ran the boarding house in Silver Creek. She finished her schooling, learned to be a proper young lady, and eventually married a good man who treated her with the respect she deserved. But she never forgot the old prospector who'd given her a second chance at life and who'd found his own second chance in the process of saving her. Sometimes redemption comes in the form of a lost child who reminds you what it means to love again. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to discover that they're not the failure they thought they were, but the hero they were meant to be all along. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of redemption and sacrifice. What did you think of Zeke's transformation from bitter hermit to protective father? Did Tommy's true identity surprise you? Tell us in the comments which moment touched your heart the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful Old West stories.